In this video, I'm going to discuss some thoughts around designing a new chart of accounts. So first, it's extremely common for clients to decide to revamp their chart of accounts when they're migrating from QuickBooks to NetSuite. And designing a chart is much more art than science. So at the end of the day, you should design a chart that works for you and your organization. So I would recommend talking to key stakeholders, whether that's your executive team or FP&A or whomever, to make sure that all of the accounts that are needed are included in the chart of account structure. So here's some basic rules that I would recommend when designing a chart of accounts in NetSuite. So first, I would recommend that you have a single AR and a single AP account, or you have two if you have intercompany transactions. So one for third-party vendors and one for intercompany vendors. And if you need to sort customer or vendor balances based on some other criteria, rather than using an account, I would use some kind of category field on the vendor or the customer. Below in the class notes, I go into a little bit more detail about what some of the limitations are around filtering the AP aging and the AR aging with journal entries and vendor bills and all that good stuff. So look in the class notes below for that. Second, I would recommend that you don't assign any currencies to accounts unless you need to, which is on bank accounts and credit cards. So if you do assign a currency, you can't change that, and you'll be limited to posting transactions to that given currency. So for example, this happened to me when I was an accounting manager at a company where we had set up our accrued expenses to be US dollars. Then we started wanting to accrue in euros, and we had to create a separate account. So you want to avoid that because there's really, in my opinion, no benefit to doing that. I'd also recommend looking at the standard. There's a couple standard accounts that are going to be included in every NetSuite instance. So I would leverage those whenever possible. And then the last tip that I'd recommend is that you want to leverage all of your segments together rather than kind of having a long chart of accounts, right? So I see commonly there might be like a G&A salaries group and an R&D salaries group. And instead of having two accounts, one for G&A and one for R&D, I would recommend you have one salaries account and then use a department segment to bifurcate between G&A and R&D. And one practice that I know is really hard to implement is to actually add definitions to all of your GL accounts, which will then kind of give clarity to the whole organization of like what activity goes to what account. But I know that's really hard to do, but it's a good practice to consider. Okay, so once you've kind of designed your chart, then the next step is the mapping exercise, where you're going to say, these QuickBooks accounts are now going to translate to these NetSuite accounts. And this is really, in my opinion, where all the judgment with your data migration project comes in. And in the historical TB section, I'm going to discuss how we can build a custom field into NetSuite so that you can kind of protect yourself against mismappings, which happen a lot. So if everything is for a one-to-one match, or you're only tweaking a couple account names or numbers, then this exercise will be really easy because for the most part, account 1000 in QuickBooks will be account 1000 in NetSuite. However, if you are drastically changing your chart, then this exercise is going to be a little bit more difficult because you're changing groupings, or you're going to have to do a little bit more effort to make sure that every used QuickBooks account is mapped to a new account in NetSuite. And what you will want to remember when you're doing this mapping exercise is that you only need to map QuickBooks accounts that have activity, not necessarily all QuickBooks accounts. And so this might be one reason to consider bringing in less historical data than more, because what I've found is that the further back you go, the more accounts there are that maybe aren't really relevant for your business anymore, and you have to figure out where you want to map them into your new chart. Okay, So, and then, the last consideration when you're doing the mapping exercise is you want to make sure that the account types, and specifically the balance sheet account types, are matched to other balance sheet account types, and the P&L account types are matched to other P&L account types. Otherwise, you're going to have issues on your balance sheet when you bring over your data. Okay, so with that, I also have some additional reading in the class notes section below and some articles I've written about. Take a look at those, and in the next video, we are going to go over how to import accounts into NetSuite. See you in the next class.